My name is Clint Burnham. I'm a professor of English at Simon Fraser University and coordinator of the Jack and Doris Shadbolt Fellowship in the Humanities. I was born in Comox, British Columbia, which is on the unceded traditional territory of the Comox or Sutlut First Nation, centered historically on Quanasam. We are recording this interview via servers and other cloud infrastructure on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Coquitlam nations. Germaine Koh is a 2023-2024 Shadbolt Fellow in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences here at Simon Fraser University. She's also a recipient of a Governor General's Award for Artistic Achievement to be given out at Rideau Hall in Ottawa on December 8th, with an exhibition opening the night before at the National Gallery. We spoke in November 2023, so welcome, Germaine.
Thank you.
So I'd like to start or continue our discussion with an idea I heard you develop during your recent artist talk at SFU School for Contemporary Arts. You mentioned the value of non-specialization, how your work partakes of a D.I.Y. or do-it-yourself ethos, the amateur, you're an amateur, that you like to get outside your lane or cross disciplines. As you know, these strategies are both praised and problematic attitudes in today's cultural landscape. Being disruptive or interdisciplinary is thought to be important, but the very idea of staying in your lane, usually around issues of identity or professionalization, is also sacrosanct. So let's be concrete and talk about some of your art. You mentioned that while your work itself is important to you, you're not the kind of conceptualist who just sends some instructions, Alice Solowit or even Ian Wallace. So for Fairweather Force's water level, which tracks local tides using stanchions and velvet ropes, you said you manufactured and learned the material and computer details. Or for the Blue Cabin project, you actually went back to school to learn, if I got this right, some construction certification.
I went and got a certificate in building construction technology around that time. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess I'm interested in two aspects of your practice here. First, the question of crossing disciplines, what that means, what's entailed, learning or doing it yourself as opposed to just more training, and then how that comes out of the artwork or relates to the artwork it's making, contributes to it, changes the final product if there is one, or its relation with audience.
Mm-hmm. All right, so it's true that although many people have described my work as conceptual, that label doesn't really feel right to me, because to me it suggests a kind of like removal from a kind of very cerebral approach that where you're removed from the world at large. But what I'm really actually interested in is kind of paying attention to the world and its systems around us, and in many cases to try to draw relationships between different kinds of systems. And to me, that means having a certain fluency with those different systems. So a lot of my work ends up being a kind of enacting kinds of translations between different systems. And when I'm thinking about work, the kind of vague conceptual play that eventually leads to works, it's often in thinking about whether there are relationships between systems that we might not normally think about. And so all of that means that calls upon me to, at certain points, delve into those different systems. And that means like learning technologies, learning how things actually work. Like if I want to sort of like point to aspects of the world that we might not be paying attention to my mind, it entails like having a kind of understanding about them. And so that's what drives me to take these kinds of deep dives into areas in which I'm not trained and to go and learn about how those things work in order to follow up these hunches, these inklings about that there could be something there that relates to something else. Like, for example, let's give an example. Like the first work that I ever did with using electronics was when I decided I was going to make a smoke machine that would sort of like uh, uh, make physically manifest, albeit in a very ephemeral way, the kind of work that we do at our computers every day, typing, and then hit a button and the message goes out into the world. And so I thought, okay, well, I wanted to physically manifest that using a smoke machine, and at the same time tie that. So I realized I needed a computer. I needed to add a computer onto this network, and that computer was going to spy on one of the other computers in the network and translate its output into Morse code and then have Morse encoded smoke signals. So I knew that had to be possible, but I didn't know how. It had to be possible because of this kind of legacy of that today's digital communications are tied to things like the telegraph and to steam power and so on. It's
That was the
called
word prayer.
prayers.
Yeah.
That's sort of after a line in Hamlet where he says something like my thought. Oh, you're the English professor. You might be able to get this better than me.
If you don't
My
mean the
words
prayers, they
my
just
words
disappear.
my
Yeah.
thoughts remain below. Words without thoughts never to have and
Yeah.
go. Or so it's like
Yeah.
it's kind of like these ephemeral things are like somehow the manifestation of all of our intentions, even if we aren't sort of necessarily aware of them. But yeah, so like that in that case, I had to at that point I didn't have any idea how to program that, so I had to hire someone to do the programming. But that was the start of me sort of learning over the shoulders of the various experts that I've hired. And so through the course of decades of making work like that, I've acquired certain kinds of technical skills and so on. And I really do feel that if I want to kind of, part of my interest is in demystifying some of these, some aspects of the world around us, to sort of make us understand that things are not as impenetrable and unattainable as we might think they are. And so part of that is to model the fact that a person could, an amateur could go out and learn enough to make things, right? It is important to me that it not just be a theoretical exercise, that these things be possible and attainable, and I feel like my practice serves as kind of model for that of the ability of a dedicated amateur to make connections and to gain a kind of fluency in different areas of operation.
Yeah, well, maybe just to follow on that idea of that people can, there doesn't have to be such a barrier to learning how to do things either informally or more formally. In that, I was thinking about how much your work engages with, or even manufacturers, housing, studios, other built spaces, in the Homemade Home series, which is, I think, is both a social enterprise and an art project. You make small freestanding artist studios and homes, but also the Blue Cabin floating residency. You do exhibit research, kind of challenge notions of who can make their own space. So yeah, do you want to talk a bit about that process, and also how the social enterprise part fits with your art making or working in gallery spaces or working on public or private land?
Yeah, so Homemade Home is an ongoing project that is, in some way, it's pretending to be a business. This is me thinking that as an artist, I have some kind of a platform to be able to exemplify the fact that a person could, person without formal training in the trades, could, for example, build a beautiful and dignified and workable small dwelling. And so I'm sort of positioning that project in a way that it might seem like I'm a home builder, but I'm actually sort of making use of the platform that I have within the contemporary art world to sort of put forth propositions and models and ideas around housing that I know are not are not possible and not accepted within the current regulatory system for building. At the same time, I did go out and get this kind of certification, proper training in building construction technology. And so, I guess I'm trying to position, again, it's kind of like a translation between what I know, between what I am convinced is possible that a person, that an amateur, non-professional builder is using, kind of with recourse to traditional systems of knowledge, what are well understood best practices for building, is every bit as capable of building a good a good house as a licensed home builder. And there's certain it's certain kinds of regulations and that make that not possible. So it's exactly sort of that in some way pretending that I'm a builder that allows that to happen, I think.
Yeah.
Right.
I
And
mean,
it's also pointing out that it's really like a matter of political will, that some people are allowed to build houses and other people are not.
right.
Right. And
Not to
so,
sort of
yeah.
ask you to
Go
solve
on.
the so-called housing crisis,
No.
which Ricardo Tranjan in that new book, The Tenant Class, says it's not so much a crisis as a matter of gross inequality. When we have a crisis like COVID, things swoop in and we sort of deal with it. But I've just, in looking at the Homemade Homes series in particular, and you talk as well about the tiny house warriors, or the pop-up tent that the activists did for safe injection sites. And of course, in the artist, tradition, there's Christophe Wajo's work in the 1980s, where he made that sort of shopping cart slash
Yep.
home. So I guess I'd like to hear your thoughts about that side of making, and we have, street sweeps where people in tents are sort of forced off the sidewalks in downtown Vancouver and many other places. Your thoughts about that social side, that social enterprise side, and how of what you're doing and how it relates to these other kinds of social practices.
Yeah. I brought up the example in that the talk that you attended recently of Sarah Blythe, who's a
Yeah.
former Vancouver's park board councillor, of course, who took it upon herself to start up a safe injection site, right? And to me, this is like a really great example of what Jane Jacobs used to talk about, or talked about, kind of neighborhood connectors, like the people who have no official title or position, but are the people that are the glue that holds neighborhoods together, right? And so to me, that's an example. I talk about the tiny house warriors because, like, to me, it's an example of folks who saw a need to uh, or took it upon themselves to make happen the things that needed to happen. They needed housing. They needed to create a kind of resistance against the Trans Mountain Pipeline. And so they're not going to stand around and wait for someone to allow them to do that. And so to me, it points to the fact that there's all kinds of gaps in our world between what is allowed to happen through regulation and what needs to happen socially. And so this world really does run on the will of dedicated amateurs and non-specialists to make things happen, using kind of traditional technologies or traditional bodies of knowledge, collective effort, and so on. And so I guess a lot of my work recently has started, especially in recent years, has started to kind of create these situations where we for skill building, for example, for skill sharing, for reconnecting people to traditional to bodies of knowledge. So it was kind of like building resilience, I want to say, that sits outside of the tradition, that sits outside of kind of like official education programs and so on. Like when every little structure that I've built within the Homemade Home project has involved people who have who are starting off with no experience in construction, for example, and they go away with some knowledge, and yeah, so I think part of that comes from realizing that somehow over the course of a couple of the decades that I've been doing this, it's that I've accumulated certain kinds of knowledge that are or have access to certain kinds of knowledge that are maybe not so common as they used to be. For example, building one's own house, or
Right.
wiring electronics, for example, and
Yeah.
things like that. So it behooves me to share that, it seems to me, in some way, right? I'm not. I am aware of the kind of how contradictory it might seem to apply for a fellowship at an institution of higher learning and dare to go in there and want to talk about the value of amateur efforts and the value of non-specialization in a place where we assume that everyone is there to become ever more specialized, the ever more the only expert in their own field or something like that, and instead to go in and sort of try to make connections between different fields. Yeah.
No, I think we welcome that, and I mean, there is the big blah blah about interdisciplinarity, which is honored more in the its absence and its practice. But I think a lot of people do want to try and make connections with people outside their own sort of a silo or zone for that. And I want to come back to this idea of what you've built up over your sort of career over the past few decades. But I wanted to ask a question about how you sort of engage with the environment or nature or the climate crisis as we sort of think about it now, and even like environment, even like in a Gestalt kind of sense. I mean, so like the the haunting, a work like the haunting, which I think signals noise from traffic via thrift store lamps, if I have that right.
Yeah. So it's adding different environmental sensors to a building. So things like accelerometers or things that are sensing vibrations, or else
Right, the rumble.
passing. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's using that to flicker just a collection of ugly household,
Yeah.
or
The-
half of them are broken down, but
yeah.
yeah, or people think they're actually broken, but it's just like a screw that's loose or something.
Right. Or like the
So
fair weather. I mean, you have these, I think it's three fair weather forces works, what they track sunlight or wind speed or water level. Is that right?
yeah, so the fair weather
Um,
forces series are all taking control of some aspect of the built environment and then driving that in relation to cycles in the natural environment.
yeah.
Yeah.
Groundwater, sea level, that public artwork in North Van that sort of tracks both soil moisture and tide level, and they appear on these display monitors slash poles in Burrard,
Yeah.
near Burrard Inlet. Is that right?
They look like
There's Errant Rain Cloud, the cloud sculpture at the Minoru Aquatic Center in Richmond that actually rains, I think, once a day. Or even something like Crowd Shyness,
mm-hmm.
as project you did in the summer of 2020 during COVID, which sort of connected COVID era social distancing to that more environmental idea of trees, branches leaving space between each other, crown shyness in that.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my question or set of questions about this is, I'm wondering what you think art can do with respect to thinking about nature or the environment or the climate crisis that science or politics can't, and if and how your thinking and practice has evolved over time around these issues.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm here. I'd like to actually draw I'd like to point out the thing that these overtly environmentally related works, they do actually have in common with some of the works that I've done that have more to do with kind of social connections. And that is that, I think that I'm often trying to set up situations in which our individual experiences going about the world, walking through turnstiles, or allowing ourselves to be directed by these lines of velvet ropes, or well, okay, so those are a couple good examples that to get us outside of that individual experience and make us realize that we're actually connected to things greater than ourselves. So so that Fair Weather Forces series, which takes control of elements of in the built environment, driving a line of velvet ropes up and down with the tide level, or turning a turnstile in relation to the speed of the wind, or taking control of the lights in a room and then dimming them in relation to the sunlight. Like it's a kind of a way of it's like in some way sort of inverting all of these these social controls or it's inverting, or it's undoing the all of these systems that we put around ourselves that insulate us from the natural environment, and instead it puts us back directly into that in relationship to that environment. And so it's like an exercise in kind of making us reconnect to the greater than human, and to these kinds of systems to which we are tied, and to which are so it's related to questions of the sublime, the thing that the emotional effect that happens when we realize that we're a small part of a greater whole, right? And so those kind of questions of awe and wonder that happen. So they are, I think those questions, they certainly do have environmental concerns, but what they do kind of establish is I think a certain kind of a sense of common cause with those systems around us, right? And that's a thing that happens in the works that I do that seem like more social as well, is that I'm looking for the kinds of points of connection, points of commonality between us as individuals, and the people, the strangers around us, that we, right?
I was thinking of that.
Looking for commonalities rather than differences, the points at which we can feel, trying to create situations where we feel, we start to feel a responsibility to a greater whole, right? Something.
I mean, I'm just looking at Seesaw Seed
Mm-hmm.
as an example of that, the public sculpture on Main Street that is a seesaw made into a park bench in a certain way.
Yeah, a park bench made into
Okay.
It's sort of modeled after the benches in the transit shelters, and it's installed right beside a transit shelter.
Right.
But it's set on a pivot so that it always tips off to one side, unless you're willing to reach out of yourself and connect with a fellow citizen and and have a conversation, or else you could be lonely and sad and sit askew by yourself.
But I mean, maybe just to push a bit about the sublime you were saying a minute ago. I mean, so haunting, I mean, that's suggesting the sublime can also, I mean, for in the kind of tradition, it's all Burkean or Kant, so it's also can be horrible.
Yes. Yeah.
And
or
and
uncanny,
the COVID,
right? Yeah.
And the COVID work, crowd shyness. I mean, that was a moment of we didn't trust or we had to socially distance. We had to be together by being apart in a certain way.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, like both the sublime as a sort of as an ecstatic or wondrous thing, or as a source of a fear, they're both related to realizing that we're not separate from this thing. We're part of it, right?
Yeah. So you've been making work for over 25 years, almost 30 years.
Mhm.
And I'm really interested in those artworks that span that entire time period. So self-portrait, this painting you began in 1994 and continue to remake over the same surface, and you document that, and it's a self-portrait you keep painting as your face itself, your body changes. Or knitwork, that immense knitted sculpture, or it's almost painterly with the colors that you've been making
Yes.
since 1992.
Thank you for recognizing that, the painterliness of knitwork.
Well, there's that one shot, and we'll have to get this in here, of it
Yeah.
spilling down the steps at the British Museum, which I
Mhm.
think is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So in this 2005 article about knitwork, you talked about the importance of giving form to the invisible, which I really liked. You said, I wanted to illustrate the magnitude of the tasks we take for granted: commuting, office work. So prayers comes from office work as well,
Mhm.
handwork. These things take up an enormous amount of time in our lives, but somehow remain unacknowledged. So yeah, I'm just thinking about those words' relations with time, and then this what art's relation is, how art can represent what is unseen in a way, or what do you think you're doing in terms of that?
Yeah, I think that, a lot of what I'm trying to do is to create situations in which we start to recognize or, come face with aspects of the world around us that we might not normally pay attention to. So trying to create situations that give voice to the minor elements in the world around us, the undervalued elements that sort of underpin and shape our daily lives. So sometimes that happens in terms of scale, for example, in knitwork, by it more or less this ever-growing blanket becomes a kind of a measure of time and of these everyday these mundane labors that are normally not paid attention to. Wait, I've got to make this stop. So um, visualizing is kind of like it's kind of like a data visualization at the same time, but it's literally measuring time as it goes. So sometimes
Hmm.
it's in terms of scale that it gives that it makes visible these minor elements. Sometimes it is actually also in terms of um, so with knitwork, it's both in terms of scale and time, the duration of the thing. But I want to say that I also do a similar thing with works that are actually really ephemeral. So, for example, I've done a number of works that are urban interventions, for example, like making spiderweb looking things using human scale spiderweb things that are made out of string in underused or out of the way urban locations, kind of drawing a sort of connection between animal survival and human survival and places a person could exist without being seen. But to me, these are kinds of works that are distinctly or obviously ephemeral, and so they kind of call for attention. And there's other works that sort of that I think even as people are participating in them, they are aware of the fact that they're really fleeting. So, for example, the piece that I did called "Call," in which I've gutted a phone that's sitting on a counter, just like kind of taxi call phone or something like that. It's been replaced with programmable circuits, and when you pick up the handset, it invites you to pick up the handset for conversation, and when you do, it dials a phone number of somebody who has agreed to have conversations with strangers, of a random person or one of the group of people who've agreed to have conversations with strangers. And then so it's like a whole set of kind of decisions and reckoning that the audience has to make in the moment. And so I think that this attention to the everyday and to is equally an attention to the present and to the conditions in the the to the world around us, right, in the present, as well as to the minor things that we don't normally pay attention to. Or when I did an installation in which I went out to an empty lot and we basically just scraped off the top layer of soil and plants and then transplanted that into the gallery for the duration of of an exhibition, which we normally think of a gallery space as a place where you see finished things, and instead there was just this profusion of process of like the plants growing, dying, bugs crawling around, and you would see people. I think that there was a real understanding on the part of the audience that what they were seeing there in the moment was soon going to be gone. And so you would see people spending hours in that gallery, and people still come up to me and talk to me about that work as in the most kind of ecstatic way about wanting to talk about what they saw and stuff. And that happens also with the telephone piece with Call. It's because it's like you have an awareness that you're the only person who had this experience, and so there's a lot of oral history that happens around it where people want to talk about the thing about their experience. I think it's really that ephemerality of those pieces that calls for that kind of sharing.
Yeah, nice. I wonder if by way of wrapping up, if you want to talk either about if there's any work that's going to be showing in Ottawa, or also your projects that you're doing here in Vancouver as part of your fellowship.
Right. Okay. Well, in Ottawa, I would love to tell you about that. I mean, it's along the lines of how I said that a lot of the work that I've been doing has been trying to create kind of learning opportunities and skill sharing opportunities. So the piece that I'm going to be showing in the Governor General's Award show at the National Gallery is a kind of a platform for other people for other people's production, right? It's already been featured in a whole series of or was the kind of structure that housed a bunch of projects that were curated, a series of projects curated by current SFU PhD student Joni Lowe. Right. And it's called Boothy. It's called HMH Boothy, and so it's growing out of this homemade home project, but it's not a dwelling per se, but rather a small structure modeled after the typical generic North American phone booth, which of course don't exist very much anymore. But we still have this. We still have this vision and understanding of the telephone booth as a place where connections happen and where transformations happen and a place where you sort of like port out to other dimensions and things like that, right? So this telephone booth is made in a way where you could switch out the panels, you can add on wheels so this thing can move around to different locations, and it can be changed to to be a service kiosk or a display cabinet or a light box, or it's been used as a greenhouse, things like that. So we're going to send that to the National Gallery. I'm kind of tickled about what we're going to do with it, because I used to work at the National Gallery in the early part of my career. I trained as a curator at the National Gallery. And I left at a point when it was going to start to feel like a conflict for me to be a practicing artist and to be a curator there. So I left. But I'm sending this piece to the National Gallery with the understanding that they're going to use it, that it's not going to just sit in a gallery and do nothing, but rather it's going to become also a platform be used to show the creative production by National Gallery staff. So it's going to be animated in that way. I really like that as a way of kind of undoing issuing a kind of challenge to certain kinds of museological practices. And there's other works in my body of work that do that, like things like knit work or the self-portrait, both of which are works that are ongoing. And so the fact that I'm asking a museum to collect a work that is deliberately unfinished goes against so many conventions of the museum of what museums do, right? And so similarly, this kind of challenge to museums to acknowledge the fact that they're filled with working artists. People behind the scenes are for the most part, or very, very many of them are creative people, and so I'm asking them to acknowledge that, and they took up the challenge, to their credit.
I'm looking at one of the pictures from the Wear series
Oh yeah.
of your the bags, I guess, and they really remind me of the those big plastic shopping bags that are sort of used totally everywhere.
Yeah, that's exactly
Yeah, yeah,
exactly what I
which
was going for.
got some kind of a fashion pickup about 10 years ago. Am I right? You know?
Yes, yeah, there was a
Right.
whole thing around Balenciaga, and
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
the sort of reclaiming that, and it was like the tables were turned in terms of who was ripping off
Yeah.
whom, whom, yeah, there. Um, yeah, but for sure. And then the work that I have in the display cabinet at
Yeah.
School of Contemporary Art is they're all sort of patterns that are that are kind of iconic within the realm of global trade and so on. But yeah, for
Yeah.
sure that red,
Yeah.
white, blue shopping bag
Yeah.
is pretty key there. It's to me, it's
Yeah.
like this, like a kind of symbol of resilience, but also and also it's like a marker of the diasporic roots or something like that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Something
People
where
on
you
the move.
yeah, yeah.
Um, because that's what they're using. And I think in Nigeria, for a while they were called go to Ghana bags because there was people from Ghana would have them, and it became this kind of
Oh, right.
internal.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, so I just was thinking of that, just looking at that image, which I know also it's very aesthetically pleasing. I mean, it's as is your outfit you're wearing for the or the outfit that you made for the cabinet
Yes.
image with the big houndstooth pattern on it.
Yeah, they had to. So there's so that piece includes houndstooth, the this red, white, blue pattern, and there's a riff on the Burberry plaid, and there's Hudson Bay blanket
Right.
stripes. So
Point blankets.
it's got it
Yes.
all going on. But to me that one was really, it was quite important that look like really convincing coat fabric and everything, but it's all just made from unraveling old clothing and weaving it into these panels. But it wanted to be pretty convincing, but super slowed down from how fashion materials are usually produced.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Anything you want to finish with?
What was the other thing you asked me? You said
Oh,
I
just what you're doing
or
here.
oh
This make
yes,
project
right.
or the clothing jam you're doing next
Yeah,
week.
yeah. So I'm so part of so the so-called research project that I'm here on is to sort of advocate for the idea that we could play around in domains in which we're not trained. So that recalls to me the um, uh, I'm not sure if I mentioned this in that talk, but it recalls to me the something that the physicist Andre Geim said in his Nobel Prize acceptance speech, where he said that it was really important to his eventual breakthroughs that he did a lot of play and experimentation in fields in which he was not an expert. Even if that kind of play was at first quite elementary. Um, and so I'm coming here to this institution of higher learning and saying with the mission to sort of suggest that we could all play in areas in which we're not experts. And so part of that is to do a kind of a series of making and doing events. So the first one is going to be this next Friday, sort of in relation to this little exhibition I have on right now of the clothing that I've made from recycled or unraveled clothing. So we're going to do a bit of a clothing jam where we're going to take a bunch of donated clothing, mash it up, maybe make it into pockets and add on to to provide pockets for the pocketless, i.e., women who never have pockets on our clothing, and so on. So opportunities for collective making, and the kinds of interesting conversations that happen around that skill sharing. connecting with, kinds of bodies of knowledge. They're maybe not especially valorized within academic environment and so on.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks, Germaine. Great conversation. Thanks for doing this today.
You're most welcome. Thank you.